My name is Vanessa Miller, and I am 36 years old. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called me while I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot, engine idling, rain streaking the windshield in long, gray lines. She didn't open with a greeting. She didn't ask how my job was going or how my knees were holding up after the half marathon I'd run the weekend before. She simply took a deep breath, the kind people take when they are preparing to deliver bad news they don't actually feel bad about delivering, and said, "Vanessa, we need to make a slight adjustment to the dinner plans this year." I remember shifting the paper bags on the passenger seat, the sound of celery crunching under the weight of a gallon of milk. "An adjustment?" I asked. "Did Aunt Sarah change her mind about bringing the pies?" "No," my mother said, her voice dropping into that smooth, practiced tone she always used when she was trying to turn a deliberate insult into a practical necessity. "It's about space, honey. Your brother Julian's new in-laws are flying in from San Diego. His father-in-law is a very distinguished surgeon, and his wife is on the board of the Regional Arts Council. They're lovely people, really top tier, and they've agreed to spend the entire holiday with us. But the dining room table only seats 10 comfortably. 12 if we squeeze, but Julian feels, and your father agrees, that squeezing would make the house look cramped. It wouldn't give the right impression." I sat in the quiet hum of my car, watching the windshield wipers sweep back and forth. "So where am I sitting, Mom? At a card table in the hallway." "Oh, that's just it," she said, letting out a little flutter of a laugh that made my jaw clench. "There really isn't room for the card table either, not with the side buffet set up for the appetizers. So we think it's best if you just skip Thanksgiving dinner this year. Julian needs to make a good impression. This is his first holiday with his new family, and we want to show them what kind of people we are. We can do a little leftovers lunch with you on Friday afternoon. Just the two of us, maybe. You understand, don't you? It's just simple math." Simple math, that was what she called it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't demand to speak to my father or text Julian to tell him what an arrogant, self-centered parasite he was. I just stared at the red brake lights of the SUV parked in front of me, felt a cold, sharp stillness settle into my chest, and said, "I understand completely, Mom." "Oh, wonderful," she gushed, relieved that she hadn't had to deal with a scene. "You've always been so sensible, Vanessa. Not like Julian, he's so sensitive to optics. We'll see you Friday around 1. I'll save you some turkey breast." The line went dead. I set my phone on the dashboard, leaned my head back against the headrest, and took a slow, deep breath. Then I pulled up my email on my phone, tapped the search bar, and typed in a single address. The lease renewal letter was already sitting in my inbox, and it only needed one signature to end. To understand how my family ended up uninviting me from a house they didn't own, you have to go back 7 years. Growing up in the Miller household meant learning very early on that there was a strict hierarchy, and my name was at the very bottom of the ledger. My brother Julian was 3 years younger, born with golden curls, an infectious smile, and an absolute inability to take responsibility for a single mistake in his life. If Julian broke a window with a baseball, it was because the sun was in his eyes. If Julian failed a class in college, it was because the professor had a personal grudge against him. If Julian maxed out 3 credit cards in his 20s, it was because he was building a personal brand that required expensive suits and dinners at steakhouses he couldn't afford. My parents, Arthur and Alina Miller, worshipped the floor Julian walked on. They mortgaged their peace of mind to fund his private high school tuition. They drained their modest savings to pay off his undergraduate credit cards. They bragged about his middle management job at a boutique consulting firm to anyone who would listen, while entirely ignoring the fact that he hadn't paid his own phone bill until he was 29. I, on the other hand, was the reliable daughter, the quiet one, the one who worked 30 hours a week at a local library while getting my degree in urban planning, the one who bought my own second-hand car, paid off my student loans 3 years early, and lived in a small, modest apartment with mismatched furniture so I could save every spare dollar I earned. My father worked in mid-level logistics for a regional trucking company until his back gave out when I was 28. My mother had worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, but quit the moment my father took early retirement. They were classic middle-class people who had spent 40 years living just beyond their means to maintain the illusion of prosperity. In the autumn of 2019, that illusion shattered. I remember getting an urgent call from my mother at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was hysterical, high-pitched, and ragged. "Vanessa, you need to come over right now. Your father is having a stroke." I dropped everything, sped across town, and burst into their living room expecting to find paramedics. Instead, I found my father sitting in his armchair, his face pale, staring blankly at a stack of paper on the coffee table. My mother was packing the rug, wringing her hands like a character in a Victorian melodrama. There was no medical emergency. The crisis was financial. The landlord who owned the charming, 3-bedroom craftsman home my parents had rented for over 12 years was selling the property. He had offered them first right of refusal, but he wanted $450,000, cash or pre-approved mortgage, within 30 days. If they couldn't buy it, he was putting it on the open market, and at the rate the local real estate market was booming, it would be sold to a developer in a weekend. "We can't move, Vanessa," my mother wept, collapsing onto the sofa beside my father. "All our memories are in this house, the height marks on the doorframe, the rose garden I planted, and where would we go? Rent around here has doubled in 5 years. We'd have to move an hour out into the country, into some dreadful little trailer park." "What about your savings?" I asked, sitting down on the edge of the coffee table. My father cleared his throat, unable to look me in the eye. We had to assist Julian with his deposit for his condo downtown last year, and then his firm had those cutbacks, so we covered his car payments for a few months. We don't have a down payment, Vanessa. We don't even have enough credit score left to qualify for a subprime loan." I stared at them. They had given away their entire retirement cushion to Julian so he could pretend to be a high-flying young professional in a downtown high-rise, and now they were facing eviction. "Did you ask Julian to help?" I asked quietly. My mother looked horrified. "Ask Julian? Oh, goodness no, he's just getting established. He has networking dinners, Vanessa. He has an image to maintain. He can't be burdened with our housing problems." So the burden fell, as it always did, on the invisible daughter. I spent 3 days crunching numbers. I had been saving diligently for 8 years, planning to buy a small townhome for myself. I had nearly $90,000 in high-yield savings, plus a stellar credit score and a stable job as a senior municipal planner. I sat down with my parents the following weekend. I offered them a deal. I would buy the house myself, using my savings for the down payment and securing a mortgage in my name alone. I would charge them a rent that was 30% below market value, just enough to cover the mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. They wouldn't have to move. They wouldn't have to face the shame of being priced out of their neighborhood. They could live out their retirement in the house they loved. There was only one condition, and it was a strict one that I insisted upon. "I don't want Julian to know," I told them, sliding the agreement across the table. "Julian has a way of turning everything into a competition, and if he knows I own this house, he will make every family dinner a nightmare. Beyond that, if he thinks you have financial backing, he will start asking you for money again. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, you found a private investor who bought the house and agreed to let you stay on as long-term tenants. You pay rent to a property management LLC I'm setting up. My name stays off the mailbox." My father wept with relief. My mother hugged me tightly, calling me her savior, promising that they would be the most quiet, respectful tenants in the world, that they would never forget what I had done for them. And for the first 2 years, things were fine. They paid their rent electronically through the online portal my LLC used. I handled repairs quietly, paying $4,000 out of pocket when the water heater died, replacing the roof gutters when a winter storm ripped them down, hiring an electrician to rewire the old kitchen. I never bragged about it. I never brought it up at Christmas. I just took care of my property and let them keep their pride. But pride is a funny thing. When it isn't earned, it rots. As time went on, my parents completely compartmentalized the reality of their situation. Because the property management company had a generic name, Cascade Property Management, LLC, And because the monthly rent was automatically deducted from my father's pension account, they began to forget who was actually keeping the roof over their heads. Or perhaps they didn't forget. Perhaps they just hated the fact that they owed their comfortable life to the daughter they had spent 30 years ignoring, while their golden son was struggling to keep up appearances. By 2024, Julian had married Chloe, a woman whose parents were wealthy corporate attorneys from California. Chloe was cultured, crisp, and intensely focused on social status. Julian, desperate to match her family's wealth, began spending money at an insane rate. He bought a luxury German sedan he couldn't afford. He took Chloe on lavish vacations to Bali and Tuscany, posting every second on social media. And my parents became utterly obsessed with Chloe and her family. Whenever I went over to the house I owned, the house whose property taxes I had paid just 3 months prior, my mother would spend 2 hours talking about Chloe's mother's wardrobe or Chloe's father's golf club membership. "They're just such high-class people, Vanessa," my mother would say, pouring tea into cups I had bought her for Mother's Day. "It really elevates Julian, being in a family like that. You should see their home in La Jolla. It's breathtaking. Marble floors, an infinity pool. It makes you realize how important it is to surround yourself with successful people." I would just nod, drink my tea, and say nothing. Gradually, my presence in my own house became an inconvenience to them. When Julian and Chloe came over for dinner, I was relegated to bringing basic side dishes while Chloe was treated like royalty. If I offered an opinion on local politics or urban development, my actual professional field, Julian would laugh condescendingly and interrupt me, and my father would nod along with him. "Vanessa sees things from a very municipal level, Chloe," Julian would say with a smirk. "Small picture stuff, bureaucracy. Not everyone is cut out for big-picture venture strategy." I watched my parents laugh at his jokes. I watched my mother clear his plate while he sat on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. I watched my father pour him 3 fingers of expensive scotch I knew my father couldn't afford, but had bought specifically to impress Julian. And then came the phone call 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Uninvited. Not because I had done something wrong, not because there was a feud, but simply because my existence didn't fit the optics my family wanted to project to a distinguished surgeon from San Diego. They needed my space. They needed my table. They needed to pretend that they were the kind of people who lived in a charming, 3-bedroom craftsman home in an affluent neighborhood entirely on their own merit, without the awkward presence of their unmarried, public servant daughter dragging down the vibe. Sitting in my car in the rain, I looked at the lease renewal form on my phone's screen. The lease agreement between Cascade Property Management, LLC, and Arthur and Alina Miller was set to expire on December 31st. The renewal document sat in my draft folder, waiting for my digital signature to extend their below-market lease for another 2 years. I didn't sign it. Instead, I tapped out a short email to my real estate attorney, a sharp, brilliant woman named Rachel whom I had known for years. "Rachel," I wrote, "do not send the lease renewal to the tenants at 1428 Elm Street. Please prepare a formal notice of non-renewal of lease upon expiration of the term, effective December 31st. In addition, I would like to schedule a full property inspection with an independent appraiser for November 28th at 10:00 a.m. Please issue the mandatory 48-hour notice of entry to the occupants tomorrow morning." November 28th was Thanksgiving Day. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were strangely peaceful. I didn't call my mother. She didn't call me. I spent the Wednesday before the holiday cooking a magnificent spread for myself in my own cozy townhome. A roasted herb turkey breast, sweet potato casserole with toasted pecans, fresh cranberry sauce with orange zest, and a scratch-made pecan pie. I invited my neighbor, an elderly widowed woman named Mrs. Gable who had no family nearby, to join me. We ate off fine china, drank good wine, and laughed for 3 hours. It was the most peaceful holiday I had experienced in a decade. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, my parents were frantically preparing for the arrival of Dr. Richard Vance, his wife Beverly, Chloe, and Julian. I knew this because my Aunt Ruth, my father's younger sister, and the only person in the family who possessed a brain and a conscience was keeping me updated via text message. "Your mother is losing her mind," Ruth texted me on Wednesday evening. She hired a private catering company to heat up side dishes because she was afraid her own cooking wasn't gourmet enough. Julian ordered 3 cases of wine from Napa. "They're acting like the Queen of England is coming to inspect the troops." "Are you going?" I replied. "Heck no," Ruth texted back. "I told Alina I had a headache. I can't stand the smell of fake money. They didn't even ask why you weren't going. Alina just said you had prior obligations." "I know what they did, Vanessa. It's disgusting." "Don't worry about it, Aunt Ruth, asterisk," I typed back. "Just enjoy your evening. The show starts tomorrow at 10. Thanksgiving morning broke crisp and clear, the sky a sharp, brilliant blue. At precisely 9:30, I dressed in a tailored, charcoal gray wool coat, a cream silk blouse, and dark trousers. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, professional knot, grabbed my leather portfolio, and drove across town. I parked 2 houses down from 1428 Elm Street. Outside the house, the scene was picture perfect. Julian's pristine German sedan was parked in the driveway, alongside a rented luxury SUV that clearly belonged to the Vance family. Through the large front bay window, I could see the chandelier glowing, the table gleaming with silver and crystal, and my mother flutteringly arranging a massive floral centerpiece. At 9:58, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind my car. Rachel, my attorney, stepped out, holding a thick leather folder. Beside her was Mark, a licensed commercial appraiser holding a clipboard and a digital measuring tool, and behind them was a uniformed county sheriff's deputy I had hired to oversee the service of notice and prevent any breach of the peace. Rachel looked at me, a tight, professional smile on her lips. "Are you ready for this, Vanessa?" "I've been ready for 7 years, Rachel," I said. We walked up the front path together. The front porch, the one my mother was so proud of, had been decorated with expensive white pumpkins, corn husks, and designer lanterns. I didn't knock. I took my master key out of my leather portfolio, inserted it into the deadbolt, turned it, and pushed the door open. The front hallway smelled of roasting turkey, rosemary, and expensive perfume. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses echoed from the dining room. "And so I told the Board of Trustees," a booming, cultured voice was saying from the dining room, presumably Dr. Vance, "that if they didn't approve the new surgical wing, I would take my entire practice to St. Jude's." Loud, appreciative laughter followed, led by my father and Julian. I stepped into the dining room entryway and cleared my throat. The laughter cut off instantly. The dining room was packed. Around the heavy oak table sat 10 people. At the head sat my father, wearing a new suit jacket. Beside him was my mother, draped in a silk blouse. Julian sat across from Chloe, both of them beaming, while an older, silver-haired man in a bespoke blazer, Dr. Vance, sat beside a woman dripping in gold jewelry. My mother's face went from radiant hospitality to utter horror in less than half a second. She dropped her linen napkin onto her plate. "Vanessa," she gasped, her voice cracking, "what on earth are you doing here?" "I told you, we spoke about this. Today is not the day for you to just drop by." Julian slammed his glass down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "Vanessa, seriously, what is wrong with you? We have guests. You can't just barge in unannounced on Thanksgiving." Dr. Vance and his wife looked confused, their eyes darting between Julian, my parents, and the small army standing in the hallway behind me. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my hands resting calmly on my leather portfolio. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice smooth, even, and completely devoid of anger. "Happy Thanksgiving. I apologize for the interruption, but this was the only time scheduled for the mandatory property inspection and legal service." My father stood up, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "What nonsense are you talking about? Legal service? Inspection? Get out of this house right now before I call the police." "You don't need to call the police, Mr. Miller." Deputy Miller stepped into the doorway, his hand resting casually near his belt. "I'm already here." My mother let out a small, strangled shriek. Dr. Vance's wife gasped, clutching her gold necklace. "What is the meaning of this?" Dr. Vance demanded, his aristocratic voice stiffening with outrage. "Arthur Julian, who is this woman? Why is the sheriff in your house?" Julian scrambled to his feet, his face pale, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She's my sister. She's mentally unstable. She's jealous because she wasn't invited today, so she's trying to make a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Julian," I said calmly. I turned to Rachel. "Rachel, if you would." Rachel stepped forward, opening her leather folder. "Good morning. My name is Rachel Vance, no relation, I assume, and I am legal counsel for Cascade Property Management, LLC. I am here to execute a formal entry for property appraisal, as well as serve the primary occupants with official legal notices." My father glared at her, his jaw working furiously. "Property management? We deal with an agency online. We don't know you. Alina, call the manager. Call Mr. Henderson." "There is no Mr. Henderson, Dad," I said quietly. The room went dead silent. My mother stared at me, her mouth working soundlessly. What did you say?" I took a step toward the table, looking my father directly in the eye. 7 years ago, when the landlord was putting this house on the market, you didn't find a mysterious private investor. You didn't secure a lease from a corporation. I bought this house. I put down $90,000 of my own savings, money I had saved to buy my own home. I took out a mortgage in my name alone. I set up Cascade Property Management, LLC, so you wouldn't have to bear the embarrassment of knowing your daughter was supporting you." A sharp, collective gasp went around the table. Julian looked at my father, then at me, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. "What? No, that's a lie. Dad, tell her she's lying. You pay rent to a company." My father didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He slowly sank back into his chair, his face ash-gray. My mother covered her face with her hands, letting out a pitiful, muffled sob. "I paid 30% below market rate for 7 years," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "I paid for the new water heater. I paid for the roof repairs. I paid the property taxes every single December. I kept this roof over your head so you could live with dignity. And in return, you treated me like a dirty secret. You took my money, you took my protection, and then you uninvited me from my own house because I didn't fit the optics for your wealthy guests." Chloe's jaw had dropped. She turned slowly to look at Julian, her eyes wide with shock and disgust. "Julian, is this true? Your sister owns this house. Your parents don't own it." Julian's face was beet red. "Chloe, wait, listen to me. It's complicated." "It's not complicated at all," Rachel interrupted crisply. She pulled a stack of legal documents from her folder and laid them directly on the table, right next to the gravy boat. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, your current residential lease agreement expires on December 31st at midnight. Under the terms of the agreement and state tenant law, this document serves as your official 30-day notice of non-renewal." My mother whipped her hands away from her face, her eyes wide with terror. "Non-renewal? What does that mean?" "It means, Mrs. Miller," Rachel said coldly, "that your lease will not be extended. You are required to fully vacate the premises, remove all personal property, and return the keys to Cascade Property Management no later than 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. If you fail to vacate, formal eviction proceedings will commence immediately on January 1st. "You can't do this," Julian screamed, stepping toward me, his fists clenched. "They're your parents, you psycho. Where are they supposed to go? You're kicking them out on the street." Deputy Miller immediately took a step forward, his voice low and commanding. "Step back, sir. Keep your voice down and maintain your distance." Julian froze, panting, his eyes darting wildly around the room. I looked at Julian, feeling a sudden, strange sense of pity for him. He looked so small, so fragile. The polished, successful young executive had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, spoiled child who had finally run out of other people's money. "They aren't going on the street, Julian," I said softly. "They have a son. A brilliant, successful son with a great job, a luxury car, and a huge apartment downtown. a son who cares deeply about optics. I'm sure you'll be more than happy to let them move into your spare bedroom. Or perhaps you can help them pay market rate for a nice apartment an hour out of town." Dr. Vance stood up abruptly, wiping his mouth with his napkin. He looked utterly mortified. "Beverly, Chloe, get your coats. We are leaving immediately." "Dad, please," Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling. "We haven't even had dinner." "We are not staying in the middle of a fraud and a family dispute," Dr. Vance snapped, glaring at Julian with pure disgust. "Julian, you told us your family owned this estate. You told us your father was a retired real estate developer. You have lied to us from the day you met my daughter." "Dr. Vance, please, let me explain," Julian begged, following them toward the hallway as Chloe and her mother scrambled to grab their designer coats. It was a misunderstanding. My family planned to buy it back." "Save it," Dr. Vance said coldly, pushing past Julian and heading for the front door. "Chloe, we will discuss your living arrangements when we get back to the hotel." Within 3 minutes, the front door slammed shut behind the Vance family. The roaring luxury SUV engine echoed down the street as they sped away. The dining room was left in absolute ruin. The expensive food was growing cold on the table. The floral centerpiece looked absurd in the harsh daylight. Julian stood in the hallway, staring at the closed front door, his head in his hands. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably now, her head resting on the white linen tablecloth. "Vanessa, please, please don't do this. We're your family." I walked over to the head of the table. I looked down at my father. He looked so old, so defeated. For 7 years, he had lived a lie, and now the foundation had crumbled. "You told me 2 weeks ago that it was simple math, Mom," I said gently. "You said there wasn't enough room at the table for everyone, so someone had to be excluded. You chose optics over loyalty. You chose pride over gratitude. Well, I've done the math, too. And the math says I don't need to spend $90,000 and 7 years of my life protecting people who are ashamed of me." My father looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Vanessa, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I was weak. I let Julian. I let your mother." "I know you did, Dad," I said. "And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to let you walk all over me for the rest of my life. You have 35 days to find a new place to live. I suggest you start packing." Mark, the appraiser, quietly began taking photos of the dining room walls, noting the condition of the hardwood floors and the light fixtures. I turned on my heel, pulled my wool coat tight around myself, and walked out into the crisp November air. The 35 days between Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve were a whirlwind. Julian tried everything. He called me 20 times a day for the first week, alternating between furious threats to sue me and desperate, weeping pleas for mercy. He sent text messages claiming my mother's health was failing because of the stress. He even showed up at my townhome once. But I refused to open the door and threatened to call the police if he didn't leave my property. When threats and tears didn't work, he tried to rally the extended family against me. But Aunt Ruth shut that down instantly. She sent a group message to the entire family detailing exactly what my parents had done, how I had saved their home 7 years ago, how they had uninvited me from Thanksgiving to impress Julian's in-laws, and how they had treated me like trash while I paid their bills. By the second week of December, the extended family had completely turned on my parents and Julian. Nobody offered to let my parents move in. Nobody offered to pay their moving expenses. Chloe filed for legal separation from Julian 3 days before Christmas, citing financial deception and irreconcilable differences. She moved back to California with her parents, leaving Julian alone in his overpriced downtown apartment, struggling to pay his mortgage on a single income. On December 30th, my parents officially signed a lease for a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a modest complex 30 miles outside the city. It wasn't a trailer park, but it certainly didn't have the charm, the rose garden, or the prestige of 1428 Elm Street. Rent was high, and without my 30% discount, it took nearly 60% of my father's monthly pension. Julian had to sell his luxury German car to pay for their moving truck and security deposit. On January 1st, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I drove back to 1428 Elm Street. The house was empty. The furniture was gone, leaving clean, pale rectangles on the carpets where the sofas and rugs had sat for 15 years. The height marks on the doorframe, the ones my mother had wept over 7 years ago, were still there, faint pencil lines tracking Julian's growth and mine. My father was standing on the front porch, holding a small ring of keys. He looked smaller, his coat hanging loosely on his frame, but the panic in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, subdued acceptance. My mother was sitting in the passenger seat of Julian's second-hand sedan parked at the curb, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at the house. I walked up the porch steps. My father handed me the keys. "Everything is clean," he said softly. "We swept the floors, we left the extra paint cans in the garage." "Thank you, Dad," I said, taking the keys. He lingered for a moment, looking out at the yard, at the dormant rose bushes sleeping under a thin layer of frost. "You were a good daughter, Vanessa, better than we deserved. I'm sorry we made you feel like you were less." "I know, Dad," I said. "I hope you like the new apartment." He gave a small, sad nod, turned and walked down the steps. He got into the car beside my mother, and Julian drove them away into the gray morning light. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the car disappear around the corner. Then I turned around, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. The air smelled of clean wood and fresh air. For the first time in 7 years, it didn't feel like a heavy burden or a secret I had to hide. It felt like what it had always been, an investment in my future. 2 months later, after painting the walls a warm, bright cream and refinishing the hardwood floors, I put 1428 Elm Street on the market. In a booming neighborhood, it sold in 4 days for $620,000, nearly $200,000 more than I had paid for it. With the proceeds, I paid off the remaining mortgage, set aside a healthy chunk for my retirement, and bought a beautiful, sunlit cottage near the coast, with a garden of my own and a porch that looks out over the water. Every Thanksgiving, I host dinner at my cottage. Aunt Ruth comes, along with a few close friends, Mrs. Gable from my old neighborhood, and a few colleagues from the planning department. We cook together, we laugh, and we set a table big enough for everyone who wants to be there. There are no seating charts. There are no optics to maintain, and nobody is ever asked to leave to make room for someone better. Because in my home, the math is very simple. Everyone at the table belongs there, or they don't get a seat at all.